Train to Pakistan, Khushwant Singh. It is the summer of 1947, but partition does not mean much to the Sikhs and Muslims of Mano Majra, a village on the border of India and Pakistan. Then a local moneylender is murdered, and suspicion falls upon Jugat Singh, the village gangster who is in love with a Muslim girl. When a train arrives carrying the bodies of dead Sikhs, the village is transformed into a battlefield, and neither the magistrate nor the police are able to stem the rising tide of violence. Amidst conflicting loyalties, it is left to Jugut Singh to redeem himself and reclaim peace for his village. First published in 1957-56, Train to Pakistan is a classic of modern Indian fiction. Khushwant Singh is India's best known writer and columnist. He has been founder editor of Yojana and editor of the Illustrated Weekly of India, the National Herald, and the Hindustan Times. He is also the author of several books which include the novels I Shall Not Hear the Nightingale, Delhi, The Company of Women, and Burial at Sea. The classic two volumes, A History of the Sikhs, and a number of translations and non-fiction books on Sikh religion and culture, Delhi, Nature, Current Affairs, and Urdu poetry. His autobiography, Truth, Love, and a Little Malice, was published in 2002. Khushwant Singh was a member of parliament from 1980 to 1986. He was awarded the Padma Bhushan in 1974 but returned the decoration in 1984 in protest against the storming of the Golden Temple by the Indian Army. In 2007, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan. Chapter 1, Dacoity. The summer of 1947 was not like other Indian summers. Even the weather had a different feel in India that year. It was hotter than usual and drier and dustier. And the summer was longer. No one could remember when the monsoon had been so late. 4 weeks the sparse cloud cast only shadows. There was no rain. People began to say that God was punishing them for their sins. Some of them had good reasons to feel that they had sinned. The summer before, communal riots, precipitated by reports of the proposed division of the country into a Hindu India and a Muslim Pakistan, had broken out in Calcutta, and within a few months the death toll had mounted to several thousand. Muslims said the Hindus had planned and started the killing. According to the Hindus, the Muslims were to blame. The fact is, both sides killed. Both shot and stabbed and speared and clubbed. Both tortured, both raped. From Calcutta, the riots spread north and east and west to Naukhali in East Bengal, where Muslims massacred Hindus, to Bihar, where Hindus massacred Muslims. Mullahs roamed the Punjab and the frontier province with boxes of human skulls said to be those of Muslims killed in Bihar. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim Hindus and Sikhs who had lived for centuries on northwest frontier abandoned their homes and fled towards the protection of their predominantly Sikh and Hindu communities in the east. They travelled on foot in bullock carts, crammed into lorries, clinging to the sides and roofs of trains. Along the way, at fords, at crossroads, at railroad stations, they collided with panicky swarms of Muslims fleeing to safety in the west. The riots had become a rout. By the summer of 1947, when the creation of the new state of Pakistan was formally announced, 10 million people, Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs, were in flight. By the time the monsoon broke, almost a million of them were dead, and all of northern India was in arms, in terror and in hiding. The only remaining oasis of peace were a scatter of little villages lost in the remote reaches of the frontier. One of these villages was Mano Majra. Mano Majra is a tiny place. It has only 3 bricks building, one of which is the home of moneylender Lala Ram Lal. The other two are the Sikh temple and the mosque. The three brick buildings enclose a triangular common with a large peepal tree in the middle. The rest of the village is cluster of flat roofed mud huts and low walled courtyards which front on narrow lanes that radiate from the center. Soon the lanes dwindle into footpaths and get lost in the surrounding fields. At the western end of the village, there is a pond ringed round by kika trees. There are only about 70 families in Mano Majra, and Lala Ramlal's is the only Hindu family. The others are Sikhs or Muslims, about equal in number. The Sikhs all own all the land around the village. The Muslims are tenants and sharing the tilings with the owners. There are a few families of sweepers whose religion is uncertain. Muslims claim them as their own, yet when Americans missionaries visit Mano Majra, the sweepers wear khaki sola topis and join their women folks in singing hymns to the accompaniment of a harmonium. Sometimes they visit the Sikh temple too, but there is one object that all Mano Majras, even Ramlal, venerate. There is a 3 foot slab of sandstone that stands upright under the kika tree beside the pond. It is the local deity, the Deo, to which all the villagers, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, and pseudo Christian, repair secretly whenever they are in a special need of blessings. Although Mano Majra is said to be on the banks of Satluj River, it is actually half a mile away from it. In India, villages cannot afford to be too close to the bank of rivers. Rivers change their moods with seasons and alter their courses without warning. The Satluj is the largest river in the Punjab. After the monsoon, its water rises and spread across its vast sandy bed, lapping high up the mud embankments on the either side. It becomes an expanse of muddy turbulence among more than a mile in breadth. When the flood subsides, the river breaks up into thousand shallow streams that wind sluggishly between little marshy islands. About a mile north of Mano Majra, the Satluj is spanned by a railroad bridge. It is a magnificent bridge. Its 18 enormous spans sweep like waves from one pier to another, and at each end of it there is a stone embankment to buttress the railway line. On the eastern end, the embankment extends all the way to the village railroad station. Mano Majra has always been known for its railway station. Since the bridge has only one track, the station has several sidings where less important trains can wait to make way for the more important. A small colony of shopkeepers, hawkers has grown up around the station to supply travelers with food, betel leaves, cigarettes, tea, biscuits, and sweetmeats. This gives the station an appearance of constant activity and its staff a somewhat exaggerated sense of importance. Actually, the station master himself sells tickets through the pigeonhole in his office, collects them at the exit beside the door, and sends and receives messages over the telegraph ticker on the table. When there are people to notice him, he comes out on the platform and waves a green flag for trains which do not stop. His only assistant manipulates the levers in the glass cabin on the platforms which control the signal on the either side, and helps shunting engines by changing hand points on the tracks to get them onto the sidings. In the evening, he lights the long line of lamps on the platform. He takes a heavy aluminium lamps to the signals and sticks them in the clamps behind the red and green glass. In the mornings, he brings them back and puts out the light on the platform. Not many trains stops at Mano Majra. Express trains do not stop at all. One of the many slow passenger trains, only two, one from Delhi to Lahore in the morning and other from Lahore to Delhi in the evening, are scheduled to stop for a few minutes. The others stop only when they are held up. The only regular customers are the goods trains. Although Mano Majra seldom has any goods to send or receive, its station sidings are usually occupied by long rows of wagons. Each passing goods train spends hours shedding wagons and collecting others. After dark, when the countryside is steeped in silence, the whistling and puffing of engines, the banging of buffers, and the clanking of iron couplings can be heard all through the night. All this has made Mano Majra very conscious of trains. Before daybreak, the mail train rushes through on its own way to Lahore, and as it approaches the bridge, the driver invariably blows two long blasts on the whistle. In an instant, all Mano Majra comes awake. Crows begin to caw in the kikar trees, bats fly back in long silent relays, and begin to quarrel for their perches in the people. The mullahs at the mosque knows that it is the time for the morning prayer. He has a quick wash, stand facing west towards Makkah with his fingers in his ears, crying in long sonorous notes Allahu Akbar. The priest at the Sikh temple lies in bed till the mullahs has called. Then he too gets up, draws a bucket of water from the well in the temple courtyard, pours it over himself, and intones his prayer in monotonous sing song to the sound of splashing water. By the time the 10:30 morning passenger trains from Delhi comes in, life in Mano Madra has settled down to its dull daily routine. Men are in the fields, women are busy with their daily chores, children are out grazing cattle by the river, Persian wheels squeak and groan as bullocks go round and round, prodded on by curses and the japs of roads in their hinter quarters. Sparrows fly about the roof, trailing straws in their beak. Dogs seek the shade of the long mud wall. Bats settle their arguments, fold their wings, and suspend themselves in sleep. As the midday express goes by, Manu Majra stops to rest. Men and children come home for dinner and the siesta hour. When they have eaten, the men gather in the shade of the peepal tree, and sit on the wooden platform and talk and doze. Boys ride their buffaloes into the pond, jump off their backs, and splash about in the muddy water. Girls play under the trees. Women rub clarified butter into each other's hair, pick leaves from their children's head, and discuss birth and marriages and death. When the evening passenger from Lahore comes in, everyone gets to work again. The cattle are rounded up and driven back home to the milked and locked in for the night. The women cook the evening meal. Then the families foregather on their rooftops, where most of them sleep during the summer. Sitting on their charpais, they eat their supper of vegetable and chapatis and sip hot creamy milk out of large copper tumbler and idle away the time until the signal for sleep. When the goods train streams in, they say to each other, "There is the goods train." It is like saying good night. The mullah again calls the faithful to prayer by shouting at the top of his voice, "God is great." The faithful nod their amens from their rooftops. The Sikh priests murmur the evening prayer to a semicircle of drowsy old men and women. Crows caw softly from the kikar trees. Little bats go flitting about in the dusk, and large ones soar with slow, graceful sweeps. The god's train takes a long time at the station, with the engine running up and down, the sidings exchanging wagons. By the time it leaves, the children are asleep. The older people wait for its rumble over the bridge to lull them to slumber. Then life in Manu Madra is stilled, save for the dogs barking at the trains that pass in the night. It had always been so until the summer of 1947. One heavy night in August of that year, 5 men emerged from the Kikar Grove not far from Mano Majra and moved silently towards the river. They were dacoits and professional robbers, and all but one of them were armed. Two of the armed men carried spears, others had carbines slung over their shoulders. The fifth man carried a chromium plated electric torch. When they came to the embankment, he flicked the torch alight. Then he grunted and snapped it off. We will wait here, he said. He dropped down on the sand. The others crouched around him, leaning on their weapon. The man with the torch looked at one of the spearmen. You have the bangles of Jagga? Yes, a dozen of red and blue glass. They would please any village wench. They will please Jagga. They will not please Jagga, one of the gunmen said. The leader laughed. He tossed the torch in the air and caught it. He laughed again and raised the torch to his mouth and touched the switch. His cheeks glowed pink from the light inside. Jagga could give the bangles to that weaver's daughter of his. The other spearmen said they would look well with those large gazelle eyes and the little mango breasts. What is her name? What is her name? The leader turned off the torch, took it from his mouth. Nuran. Nuran, he said. Oh, the spearman said. Nuran. Did you see her at the spring fair? Did you see that tight shirt showing off her breast, the bells twinkling in her plaits, and the swish swish of silk hair? Huh? The spearman with the bangles cried. Huh? Hi, hi. He must give Jagga a good time, said the gunman who had not yet spoken. During the day, she looks so innocent you would think she would not have shed her milk teeth, he sighed. But at night she puts back antimony in her eyes. Antimony is good for the eyes. One of the others said, it is cooling, it is good for the people's eyes as well. The gunman said, and the cooling to the patients too. Jagga? The leader said. The others laughed. One of them suddenly sat erect. Listen, he said, there is a good strain. The others stopped laughing. They all listened in silence to the approaching train. It came to a halt with rumble and the wagons groaned and creaked. After a time, the engine could be heard moving up and down, releasing wagons. There were loud explosions as the released wagons collided with the one on the sidings. The engine chuffed back to the train. It is time to call on Ramlal, the leader said and got to his feet. His companions rose and brushed the sand off their clothes. They formed a line with their hands joined in prayer. One of the gunmen stepped in front and began to mumble. When he stopped, they all went to their knees and rubbed their foreheads on the ground. Then they stood up and drew the loose ends of their turbans across their faces. Only their eyes were uncovered. The engine gave two long whistle blasts, and the train moved off towards the bridge. Now, the leader said. The others followed him up the embankment and crossed the field. By the time the train had reached the bridge, the men had struck the pond and were walking up a lane that led to the center of the village. They came to the house of Lala Ramlal. The leader nodded to one of the gunmen. He stepped forward and began to pound on the door with the butt of his gun. Oi, he shouted. Lala! There was no reply. Village dogs gathered around the village and began to bark. One of the men hit a dog with the flat side of his spear blade. Another fired his gun into the air. The dogs ran away with whimpering and started to bark louder from a safer distance. The men began to hammer at the door with their weapons. One struck it with his spear, which went through to the other side. Open, you son of fornication, or we will kill the lot of you, he shouted. The woman's voice answered, who is it who calls at this hour? Lalaji has gone to the city. Open, and we will tell you who we are, and we will smash the door. The leader said, I tell you, Lalaji is not in. He has taken the keys with him. We have nothing in the house. The men put their shoulder to the door, pressed and pulled back and butted into it like battering rams. The wooden bolt on the other side cracked and the doors flew open. One of the men with a gun waited at the door and the other four went in. In one corner of the room, two women sat crouching. A boy of 7 with large black eyes clung to the older of the two. In the name of God, take what we have, all our jewelry, everything, implored the old woman. She held out a handful of golden silver bracelet, anklets, and earrings. One of the men snatched them from their hands. Where is the Lala? I swear by the Guru he is out. You have taken all we have. Lala has nothing more to give. In the courtyard, 4 beds were laid out in a row. The man with the carbine tore the little boy from his grandmother's lap and held the muzzle of the gun to the child's face. Women fell at his feet, imploring, "Do not kill brother. In the name of Guru, don't." The gunman kicked the woman away. "Where is your father?" The boy shook with fear and stuttered upstairs. The gunman thrust the boy back into the woman's lap. The man went out into the courtyard and climbed the staircase. There was only one room on the roof. Without pausing, they put their shoulders to the door and pushed it in, tearing it off its hinges. The room was cluttered with steel trunks, piled one on the top of the others. There were two charpais with several quilts rolled up on them. The white beam of the torch searched the room and caught the moneylender crouching under one of the charpais. "In the name of the Guru, the Lalaji is out," one of the men said, mimicking the woman's voice. He dragged Ram Lal out by his legs. The leader slapped the moneylender with the back of his hand. "Is this the way you treat your guests? We come and you hide under a charpai?" The Ramlal covered his face with his arms and began to whimper. "Where are the keys of the safe?" asked the leader, kicking him on the behind. You can take all jewelry, cash, account books. Don't kill anyone," implored the moneylender, grasping the leader's feet with both his hands. "Where are the keys of your safe?" repeated the leader. He knocked the moneylenders sprawling on the floor. Ramlal sat up, shaking with fear. He produced a wad of notes from his pocket. "Take these," he said, distributing the money to the five men. "It is all I have in the house. All is yours." "Where is the key of your safe?" "There is nothing left in the safe, only my account books. I have given you all I have. All I have is yours. In the name of the Guru, let me be." Ramlal clasped the leader's leg above the knees and began to sob. "In the name of the Guru, in the name of the Guru." One of the men tore the moneylender away from the leader and hit him full in the face with the butt of his gun. "Hi, hi, hi," yelled Ramlal at the top of his voice and spat out blood. The woman in the courtyard heard the cry and started shrieking, "Daku, Daku." The dog barked all around, but not a villager stirred from his house. On the roof of his house, the moneylender was beaten with butts of guns and spear handles, and kicked and punched. He sat on his haunches, crying and spitting blood. Two of his teeth were smashed, but he would not hand over the keys of his safe. In the sheer exasperation, one of the men lunged at the crouching figure with his spear. Ramlal uttered a loud yell and collapsed on the floor with the blood spurting from his belly. The man came out. One of them fired two shots in the air. Women stopped wailing. Dogs stopped barking. The village was silenced. The dacoits jumped off the roof to the lane below. They yelled defiance to the world as they went out towards the river. "Come," they yelled. "Come out if you have the courage. Come out if you want your mothers and sisters raped. Come out, brave man." No one answered them. There was not a sound in Mano Majra. The man continued along the lane, shouting and laughing, until they came to a small hut on the edge of the village. The leader halted and motioned to one of the spearmen. "This is the house of the great Jagga," he said. "Do not forget our gift." Give him his bangles. The spearman dug a package from his clothes and tossed it over the wall. There was a muffled sound of breaking glass in the courtyard. "Oh, Jaggia," he called in a falsetto voice. "Jaggia." He winked at his companions. "Wear these bangles, Jaggia. Wear these bangles and put henna on your palms. Or give them to the weaver's daughter," one of the gunmen yelled. "Hi," the other shouted. They smacked their lips, making the sounds of long, lecherous kisses. They moved on down the lane, still laughing and blowing kisses towards the river. Jugut Singh did not answer them. He did not hear them. He was not at home. Jagat Singh had been gone from his home about an hour. He had only left with the sound of night goods train told him that he would not now be safe to go. For him, as for Descartes, the arrival of train that night was a signal. At the first distant rumble, he slipped quietly off his charpai and picked up his turban, wrapped it round his head. Then he tiptoed across the courtyard to Haystack and fished out a spear. He tiptoed back to his bed, picked up his shoes, and crept towards the door. Where are you going? Jagat Singh stopped. It was his mother. To the fields, he said. Last night, wild pigs did a lot of damage.